Written 10 years after Married Alive, Leather Wings by Marilyn Duckworth is a very different kind of story. Wallace, the Rawleys Man, comes into the lives of Esther and her young granddaughter. Prepare to be entertained and challenged. Esther's family are careful to cover their mouths when they chew and when they yawn. Esther is equally careful to cover her illicit passion. Behind the poised hand, it is acceptable for feelings to writhe and convulse. Everyone does it. Love is the excuse, or Esther's excuse. Excuse me, I fell in love. Well, you know how it is. In the beginning, she told it to herself like a story, like a novel in which she was heroine and beautiful. In the first instance, 16 years ago, the little bit of gilt on the gingerbread only helped it to slip down faster, if that isn't too rude a metaphor for what Esther and Donald get up to in his car, her car, the park. But as time goes by, guilt has a way of solidifying like fat and sticking in the throat. It isn't natural to be able to deceive the parties involved for such a length of time. The sum of years measuring a marriage can only end up in the credit column, a deserving plus, a tick from the hand of society, while an affair, this affair anyway, the amount has become merely ludicrous, a clumsy total, a tachyderm trying to tango. At one time they had feared being found out. By now, who would believe them? Donald has odour eaters and orthotic arch supports in his shoes. Esther has had her varicose veins stripped. It is possible, in fact, that some of the older staff in Esther's office might remember prodding suspicions about the two of them, but if so, no one is excited by it now, not even Esther and Donald. Not excited. Yet there is something there, a comfortable added dimension to life, like shag-pile carpeting. She would miss it if it were removed and the floor left bare as her husband's hairless chest. On Coronation Street, Deirdre mouths fury at her teenage daughter Audrey Roberts, twists her face in silent comment. How would Esther appear to television viewers? How would they judge her from the safety of their living rooms? Bedtime, Jania. No, switch it off, Rex. Rex? She notices Rex has gone to sleep. His top plate has slipped down so that he has developed a horse's mouth, and his breath whistles raggedly now that the TV sound is turned off. Jania giggles. In the little girl's bedroom, Esther has to step carefully so as not to walk on the toy metropolis, laid out between door and wardrobe, expanding daily. It was Esther's fault, in a way, because it was she who gave Jania the chipped china teapot in the shape of a house with roof and chimney, which became the first dwelling in the village. The rest of it is a shanty town, cardboard city. The troll dolls, standing on sentry duty between egg carton cottages and Weet-Bix packet villas, are in Esther's mind beggars, winos, whereas to Jania they are mummies and daddies, solid citizens. You knocked over Mr. Debenham, Jania accuses. Now I'd have to put him in the hospital. Sorry, where's the hospital? I'll have to make one. Esther handles the doll, a leather-jacketed, red-head troll. He looks okay to me. It's inside. He's broken something inside him. I can fix it. Oh, good. Esther thanks God for fantasy. She reminds herself that Jania is missing her father, that arrogant moustached man whom poor Prue loved and whom Jania resembles. She thinks of Prue at this age and puts her lips to the child's soft hair. Her own mother was usually too occupied to kiss her good night, but she had always made an important ritual of it with Prue. Sleep tight, she commands. No getting out of bed. You shouted, Jania says. Did I? When? At 4:15. Pardon? She is startled by this accuracy. That's why I ran away. I don't remember shouting. What had you done? She ransacks her memory without result. "Don't matter. You got me back." "I'm sorry if I shouted. Sometimes people do shout, but they don't mean anything by it. People get angry. It doesn't mean they want to hurt you." "You said at dinner they do. Some people do hurt you. Villains." "I'm not a villain, Jania. I'm your grandmother." Jania gazes up at her, puts up a small hot hand, and passes it over the woman's face thoughtfully, like a blind person. "What are you doing?" "Just seeing if you're a fake. What's my favourite pudding?" "Lemon sago." "That's right. Okay, you can go. Night-night." She turns her face into the pillow with a small sigh. Esther picks her way carefully down the main street of Jania's city towards canned TV laughter in the lounge. Too loud. Rex must be going deaf on top of everything else. He is sitting there, wide awake now, with the remote control in his hand, like a gun, ready to shoot. Esther is not disarmed. Esther entertains the Rawleys Man in the kitchen. It had been Rex who answered the door as Esther was at the back, changing from her office shoes. But it is Esther now who handles the samples, matching them against the price list. She approves of Rawleys. Her mother swore by Rawleys' preparations right up until she died. In the home, she kept herrings in an old Rawleys tin, Esther recalls now. The man glances from time to time at Rex, who frowns into a newspaper and turns back quickly to the woman and the little girl hugging a stained velvet cushion. "What's your name, then? Ermintrude? Goldilocks?" Jania laughs. "Don't you have a name, then? Mummy?" He addresses Esther. "She's my granddaughter, Jania. Say thank you, Jania." The man has produced a tiny, pale yellow rubber ball. "Do you like it? What it does? Well, it glows in the dark. You can take it to bed with you and it won't get lost under the covers. It'll call out to you, 'Here I am, come and bounce me.' That's what it says." Jania puts down the cushion and holds on to the little rubber ball, squeezing and staring down at it in her hand. "It feels funny." She bounces it and loses it temporarily under the table. "I start to tell the woman my best story, the one about this lady whose dog attacked one of her chooks, nearly tore its head off, and how the grandmother, a canny old bird herself, tore up a tea towel and put Rawleys ointment on it, and bound the chook's neck, and 3 weeks later it was good as new, feathers and all. I kid you not. No, it's true. They always like that one. Man and beast ointment. I sell a lot of that. But this woman goes crazy for my vitamin range, buying up product as if she never eats any meat or veggies. Her husband's eyebrows go right up over his head, but he doesn't stop her. She holds the purse, I guess. She fetches it out of her handbag. I say, 'Yes, it's a very good product. There's been a rush on it. It shouldn't be much of a delay, a week or so. I'll get the other stuff to you, toot sweet.'" "You make a living out of this game, do you?" Rex asks. Is it skepticism or envy on his face? Is he thinking of taking up a similar occupation himself, perhaps? Selling small household supplies? Yes, I do all right." The two men regard each other warily, like two dogs in a street. The conversation stops, jammed. The Rawleys man looks half fearful of the older man and is the first to drop his gaze. "Don't bounce it near the stove," Esther warns Jania over her shoulder, showing the salesman to the door. She smiles at him warmly in case he has felt the chill coming off Rex. Rex is in a bad mood today, and letting the household know it. She doesn't believe Rawleys salesmen can be having an easier time of it than all these small businesses who are struggling to pay their rents. Some of their creams and cough sweets and essences are as good as you'll get anywhere, but how many housewives do their shopping from home these days? And she feels for anyone with a speech impediment. She has reason to, although no one would guess Esther had ever had a problem of that kind. Not now. "She'll break a few hearts, your wee daughter." "Granddaughter." "Oh, yes, ha ha," he laughs. "Grannies get younger every day, if you ask me. I'm a family man myself. She's staying for the holidays, is she?" "A bit longer than that, actually." "Well, I don't suppose you're complaining. Did I leave the receipt with you? That's right, yes. When he is gone, Esther returns to reproach Rex for what has seemed like rudeness. Rudeness to door salesmen is on a par with rudeness to taxi drivers, waiters, the next best thing to racism. Unless, of course, you have a valid reason for complaint, bad service, shoddy goods. Esther can wave her hands about and raise her voice with the best of them when she knows she's got a case. Rex is outside in the garden, wielding secateurs at the fuchsia bush. He has dropped the newspaper untidily so that it forms a collapsed tent on the kitchen tiles. Considering it is Rex who is number one house cleaner since his retirement, he does very little to make his job easier. The balance has shifted a little since Jania entered the household, and Esther shortened her work hours voluntarily. Rex had told her not to bother. He was there to mind the child all hours of the day, but Esther had felt it right that she be there at home time. She had put the same restrictions on herself for Prue, despising latchkey parents, and having said so too often to let herself become one of them. When her mother was away, resting, she had had to let herself into a silent house after school. She hadn't known Rex would resent her helpful presence at 3:30. It was as if she threatened his authority in the house. He didn't like her in his kitchen, turning down the gas under his vegetables when he forgot, clearing things off the table, and setting up drawing utensils for Jania. It was ridiculous. She would have welcomed help in a similar situation, but instead he stages these occasional rebellions, leaving his mess on the bench top deliberately, failing to put dishes in the machine. It depends on what sort of mood he is in, perhaps if his heart is worrying him, twinging. He will never tell her unless it is a really bad pain. Then he uses his puffer. And what if he should have an attack while alone in the house with Jania? It is Esther's duty to be there. Jania is in the passageway, bouncing her glow-in-the-dark ball with curtains drawn. When Esther steps into the darkness, the small round glow zigzags up and down in front of her face. It works! Esther switches on the light. Don't you go knocking over my pot plants. It feels funny, like chewing gum. Feel. She presses the ball into Esther's palm. It isn't sticky, though. See? Esther pulls a face of revulsion, making Jania laugh. If he gives one of these to every little girl, he must be doing all right for himself. Play with it in your room, all right? No. What do you mean, no? You'll do as I say. Esther is shocked over again by her grandchild's defiance. She doesn't remember Prue, the child's mother, being so cheeky. Can she have forgotten? I can't play with it in there. It would be like a bomb. I'd have to build up my city again if there was a bomb. I want to play in here. She stares at Esther, challenging her to understand, to be an understanding grandmother. Why can't Esther keep her temper and understand? They confront each other, wielding frowns for weapons. Oh, do what you like. Just be careful, that's all. She opens the side door and calls out to Rex. Are you all right? Of course I'm all right. You don't have to shout. He glances up at the next door windows. What's happening about dinner, then? I'll be in a sec. He lunges with his clippers and lops off a large, ragged branch, kicking it with unnecessary force against the fence. She isn't the only bad-tempered one in the house. Why were you so ratty with the Rawleys Man? She demands. Was I? No, I didn't like him. Did you? Uriah Heep. Smarmy. He has to be nice. He's a salesman. Jania is very taken with that little ball. It is particularly since Rex's illness that the guilt has become boringly noticeable, and not just because he is at home all day, inconveniently occupying the house. Rex is a sad man, and his sadness makes Esther sad, when it doesn't make her crazy. She would hate to hurt Rex. Just as there is no excuse for her attitude to Jania, there is no excuse either for her lack of love towards poor old Rex, whom she married in love. She must have, 36 years ago, and who has committed no sin other than to have grown older, like herself. She could never tell him about her infidelity, her faithlessness. His heart might stop. On the other hand, she can't quite bring herself to give up Donald and stop her own heart. She is used to Donald. Who knows, he might be part of what keeps her ticking, like a clock battery. She doesn't believe this, not really. She isn't a dependent woman, has always been her own person, and yet she doesn't dare find out. Would Donald notice? They don't do it so often these days. It's mostly the talk. But how galling to have to wonder how long it might take him to notice if she were to absent herself from their intimacy. The talking is important. In fact, what she likes about Donald is the pleasure he takes not just in her body, but in her conversation. She enjoys the way he watches her mouth while she talks. "Now," he will say greedily, arranging her opposite him like a tray of party nibbles. He prefers to get out of the car and walk to some place where they can do this, sit face to face. Now, tell me about your awful life." And she does, translating all kinds of boring domestic misery and office gossip into sentences that make him double up with joyful humour, to make her double up as well, so that her life sieves down to just this, a series of comedy sketches. With Donald, not in the office of course, but outside it, she sees herself quite differently, under strobe lighting, coloured, turning on a revolving set, offering angles that are only optimistic, or mostly. She doesn't like to disappoint him with real problems, not outside of work, and rarely does. The sex is better after a good laugh. And he does care about her. There are things he understands about Esther that Rex would never understand. Rex is too good. For one thing, Donald is sympathetic about Jania. He doesn't criticize Esther, as Rex does, for finding the child difficult. "You've been dumped on," he said when he heard she was being dispatched to them, like a parcel. Donald isn't good with children himself, only consenting to know his own sons properly when they were old enough to be capable of decent intellectual discussion and a game of poker. She remembers his faint puzzlement, embarrassment even, on occasions when she became passionate about Prue, her own child. When the accident happened, and Prue didn't regain consciousness, Esther and Rex had flown straight over to Canada, the natural reaction, surely, but it had seemed to puzzle Donald. It couldn't bring Prue back, he said, reminding her of how she had never liked her son-in-law, playing back some of her funny names for him, and pointing out that the 3-year-old might be better off without a sobbing grandmother. She had her dad and a perfectly good hospital staff caring for her, sympathetic and sane, which for the time being Esther was not. When Esther returned from this sad trip, Donald had avoided being on his own with her for weeks, unsure of how to behave in the face of grief. Yes, Donald isn't without his failings, but on the plus side is his cheerful wickedness, his sense of humour, qualities missing in Rex. Rex is hard, the doctor has explained to her. A bad heart is bad for the humour, can make a man morose. Rex has missed the message in his Reader's Digest, "Laughter is the best medicine," which he reads regularly and seriously enough. Now Donald is her only real friend. Her thing with him has led her to neglect her other friendships, with women, for instance, until, she noticed this recently, she can lay claim only to acquaintances, workmates, members of her Thursday reading group, and neighbours she has got to know through her sometime editing of the local newsletter. Enough of these, but nothing like a proper friend. It matters. When Rex had his first attack, and she was so frightened, that was when she noticed it first. Donald, of course, was limited in the help he could offer her then, and perhaps he preferred it that way, she thinks now, in her sour mood. Other than Donald, who is there? Melanie, a faithful former school friend, has moved out of her orbit into a succession of menial housewifely jobs, and watches the soaps on television. Sometimes they chat at the supermarket checkout, where Melanie has landed a job. Esther is clearly still friend in Melanie's head, although they have so little in common. Melanie would have no trouble loving a grandchild. With her friends at the office, Esther exchanges views on the latest news scandals and joins in a daily contest to do the crossword. More than this, she has judged risky and unnecessary. Donald is only steps away in his boxy office, multicoloured tie flashing behind the glass. A careful existence, dull. And yet not so dull as some, not as dull as Melanie. Melanie reads Mills and Boon. Esther is writing a Mills and Boon, which is quite a different thing, and anyway, it's a secret. She won't confess it to the women's reading group, not until she is published and rich. Then she will have no trouble finding friends to understand her. Esther needs a new friend.